After all the trouble we've been through, you want to marry me?
Well, I'm sure he won't get into trouble on a weekly basis.
At 82, Stefanie Powers still walks with that same classy confidence that made her and Robert Wagner the ultimate TV couple in Heart to Heart. For decades, she's carried herself with calm poise, never letting the chaos of Hollywood shake her. Whenever people brought up the scandal that forever linked Wagner's name to the Catalina mystery, she'd simply call him an old friend who once understood me better than anyone else. That quiet grace kept the public guessing. Was she protecting him or just choosing peace over drama? But in a shocking twist, Stefanie broke her silence. In a raw, exclusive chat with Variety, she finally opened up about the long, whispered secrets surrounding Natalie Wood's tragic death. She hinted that key details in Natalie's autopsy report were purposely brushed aside, details that could have changed everything. Stefanie even brought up the huge inheritance Wagner received after Natalie's death. So why now? After nearly 50 years of silence, what pushed her to speak? And even more shocking, how did Robert Wagner react when her words hit the headlines? Flashback to Thanksgiving night, 1981. A thick fog rolled over Catalina Island like a ghostly curtain, swallowing the sea in cold silence. Out there, anchored in the mist, was Wagner's beloved yacht, Splendor, his pride and joy, where he hosted glamorous parties for Hollywood's elite. But that night, the laughter stopped. Within hours, that same yacht turned into the stage for one of Hollywood's darkest, most chilling mysteries. By dawn, on November 29th, the lifeless body of Natalie Wood, star of West Side Story and Rebel Without a Cause, was discovered floating less than a kilometer from Avalon Harbor. She was wearing a red nightgown, a life jacket put on backward, and socks still clinging to her feet. Her hair, tangled with seaweed, told a story the ocean refused to hide. The autopsy revealed bruises on her wrists, knees, and arms, but investigators brushed them off as post-mortem injuries. Yet, in his private notes, Coroner Thomas Noguchi wrote something spine-chilling. These injuries are not consistent with a natural fall. That explosive line never appeared in the official report. According to Wagner, the night had been perfectly normal. He, Natalie, and actor Christopher Walken, her co-star from Brainstorm, had dinner at Doug's Harbor Reef, a fancy restaurant overlooking the sea. Wagner claimed it was a calm, pleasant evening, but witnesses remembered something totally different. The staff later recalled the atmosphere was tense, like a wire ready to snap. Something wasn't right that night. And maybe, just maybe, Stefanie Powers finally decided the truth was worth more than silence. A waiter later told the Los Angeles Times that the tension at that dinner table could have cut glass. He said Wagner suddenly slammed his glass down so hard it rattled the silverware, and Natalie just looked down, quiet and defeated. Another diner nearby swore they overheard Christopher Walken encouraging her, saying, "You were born to act, don't stop now." Wagner's icy reply? She should be home with her husband and kids. The whole restaurant could feel the chill in the air. By 10 p.m., the trio headed back to the yacht Splendor. But according to Captain Dennis Davern, something had changed. Big time. He later told 48 Hours that the calm night turned chaotic. He said he heard bottles smashing, yelling, echoing across the deck. And then, total silence. Hours later, at 1:30 a.m., Wagner finally reported Natalie missing. But here's the twist. Locals near the harbor said they'd heard a woman screaming nearly 2 hours before that call. That timeline didn't add up, and investigators started wondering, did Wagner delay calling for help on purpose? When Natalie's body was discovered hours later, police called it an accidental drowning caused by intoxication. Case closed, or so they thought. But behind the scenes, even some members of the investigation team felt uneasy. Too many strange details were brushed aside. Her life jacket had no tears, even though reports claimed she'd fought for her life. No one tested her fingernail residue, even though there were scratches on her wrists. And the dinghy she was supposedly using to escape the yacht? It was still tied up, perfectly secure, like it hadn't been touched at all. Even creepier, some of the crime scene photos mysteriously disappeared, only to resurface 30 years later in 2011. That discovery reignited every rumor Hollywood thought was long dead. Media outlets dove right back in. People magazine asked the questions everyone else was scared to say out loud. Why was her life jacket on backward? And why would a woman who was terrified of deep water leave the yacht alone in the freezing dark? Journalist Dominic Dunn from Vanity Fair added another haunting observation. I've seen people in pain, but I've never seen anyone suffer so carefully as Robert Wagner. His words cut deep, hinting that Wagner's calm exterior might have been hiding something darker. For decades, the case sat frozen in time until Captain Davern dropped a bombshell in 2011. He admitted he'd lied before. He said Wagner did lose his temper that night and even stopped anyone from turning on the lights to search for Natalie. That confession blew the case wide open. Investigators reopened the file, and by 2018, Robert Wagner was officially listed as a person of interest. The new report listed Natalie's cause of death as undetermined, keeping the mystery alive. Everyone thought the story would finally fade away until Stefanie Powers, Wagner's longtime heart-to-heart co-star, broke her silence. She and Wagner had shared a deep bond since they met on set in 1979, quickly becoming one of TV's most iconic pairs. Stefanie once called him her kindred spirit, the man who understood her timing and emotions better than anyone. After Natalie's death, Wagner leaned on Stefanie for comfort, and for years their friendship stayed strong. But behind that loyalty, the world began to wonder, was she protecting a friend or hiding a truth that could shatter Hollywood forever? In her stunning Variety interview, Stefanie Powers dropped a revelation no one saw coming. She confessed, "I read the autopsy file in 2012, and parts of it were redacted. Some pages were completely removed from the public copy." Her voice carried a mix of disbelief and frustration as she explained that the original report supposedly included disturbing notes, circular bruises around Natalie's wrists, and deep abrasions near her ribs. But those details? They mysteriously vanished from the official 1981 version. Stefanie didn't hold back. She added, "Someone didn't want the world to know Natalie struggled. They just wanted people to believe she fell." That one line sent shockwaves tearing through Hollywood. Within hours, media outlets were buzzing, and journalists scrambled to verify her claims. Vanity Fair's Maureen Orth confirmed that Stefanie's description matched confidential documents she herself had once accessed years ago. Orth even recalled, "After the tragedy, Wagner wasn't the same man I knew." Stefanie remembered it too, those final heart-to-heart days when something about Wagner had changed forever. She said he grew distant, hollow, almost haunted. On set, he'd sometimes freeze mid-scene, his eyes locked somewhere far away, lost in thought. "He lived as if carrying a shadow," she said softly. "I don't think he ever truly slept again after that night." Her words didn't accuse him outright, but they cracked open a door Hollywood had tried for decades to bolt shut. If even his closest friend and confidant now claimed key evidence was hidden, then maybe the question that's haunted generations still has no clear answer. How did Natalie Wood really die? And just like that, the old wounds of Hollywood's golden era began to reopen. Behind the perfect smiles, designer suits, and flashing cameras, people started looking differently at Robert Wagner, the man once celebrated as the embodiment of classic charm. Suddenly, all the love affairs, whispered rumors, and blurred truths surrounding his past were back under the spotlight. To understand Wagner's tangled legacy, you've got to go back to the mid-1950s, when Hollywood was dripping in glamour, cocktails, and cigarette smoke. A young, polished face was being hailed as the new prince of the silver screen, Robert Wagner, barely in his 20s. 20th Century Fox wasted no time promoting him as the next Clark Gable, elegant, confident, and dangerously magnetic. With his sharp looks and smooth charm, Wagner could make a room stop cold just by walking in. But fame in Beverly Hills came with a price. Every step was trailed by flashbulbs and gossip. The city was a carousel of luxury and temptation, and Wagner became its favorite attraction. He was constantly spotted at the legendary Beverly Hills Hotel, where reporters from the Los Angeles Examiner literally camped in the lobby, waiting for a glimpse of him. Each sighting sparked new headlines. One night, he'd arrive arm in arm with Joan Collins. The next, he'd be dining with Debbie Reynolds, or laughing poolside with Elizabeth Taylor. Every appearance seemed to fuel a new rumor, a new story, a new name added to his list. Hollywood couldn't get enough of him, and behind that flawless smile, Robert Wagner became more than just a rising star. He became the center of one of the industry's most complicated and enduring legends. The romance that truly set Hollywood on fire was Robert Wagner's scandalous affair with the legendary Barbara Stanwyck, the powerhouse star of Double Indemnity. She was 23 years older, a Hollywood queen already carved into silver screen history, while Wagner was just the charming newcomer trying to prove he belonged. They met in 1953 on the set of Titanic, and from that moment, he was hooked. The magnetism between them was undeniable. Wagner was drawn to her like she carried the very light of old Hollywood itself. It didn't take long for the press to catch on. Gossip columns exploded with speculation, calling their chemistry too natural to be just acting. The Los Angeles Examiner even ran a late-night photo of them leaving set together, side by side, under the caption, "The veteran star finds her second spring in the arms of a man 20 years younger." That line alone had fans whispering in disbelief. Years later, journalist Rex Reed dropped a truth bomb. He claimed Barbara herself had once confessed, "He makes me feel young again. When I'm with him, I forget how old I am." That single quote was as good as confirmation. Yes, the rumors were real, but back then, Hollywood had little mercy for a love that defied its rules. Age gap relationships were a scandal waiting to erupt, and theirs was no exception. Despite all the noise, Barbara and Wagner kept their love quiet, meeting in secret, away from the cameras. Their relationship stretched on for years, shadowed by judgment and whispers. And that shadow followed Wagner everywhere, even when he met the woman who would define the rest of his life, Natalie Wood. Natalie was just 18, a rising star already adored as America's screen sweetheart. After Rebel Without a Cause, she was Hollywood royalty. Wagner, still fighting to revive his career, met her at a Christmas party hosted by director Nicholas Ray. Sparks flew instantly, and within months, he proposed. Their wedding in 1957 at the glamorous Beverly Hills Hotel wasn't just a ceremony. It was an event broadcast live on ABC, a fairy tale for the entire nation to watch. Life magazine splashed their smiling faces on its cover with the headline, "Natalie Wood and Robert Wagner, America's Golden Couple." But behind those perfect smiles, the cracks were already showing. Natalie's fame kept soaring. Scripts, interviews, red carpets, while Wagner found himself slipping into her shadow. A close friend later told People magazine, "Robert loved her, but he couldn't stand it when she was more successful than he was." The tension bled into their everyday life. On set, Natalie was warm and open, bonding easily with her co-stars, while Wagner reportedly grew jealous, sometimes furious. Rumors started swirling that he'd show up unannounced on set whenever she was working with another man, especially male directors or co-stars. Reporters from The Hollywood Reporter wrote that his temper was becoming an open secret, and by 1961, the tabloids had a new target: whispers of Wagner's alleged affair with Swedish bombshell Anita Ekberg, the goddess from La Dolce Vita. Photos of Robert Wagner and Anita Ekberg soon flooded the gossip columns. One infamous spread in Confidential magazine showed them lounging together in Palm Springs, boldly captioned, "The Nordic Rose and the Married Man." The scandal was impossible to ignore. Just a year later, Natalie Wood quietly filed for divorce. Her court papers contained only 2 words: irreconcilable differences. No accusations, no public drama, but everyone in Hollywood knew it wasn't just incompatibility. It was heartbreak dressed up as civility. After the split, Wagner tried to rebuild his life. He married actress Marion Marshall in 1963, and they welcomed a daughter, Katie. But even that union couldn't escape the ghosts of his past. 6 years later, the marriage fell apart. Then, fate took a strange turn. In 1972, at a glittering Malibu party hosted by none other than Frank Sinatra, Wagner saw Natalie again. They danced to "The Way You Look Tonight," and for a moment, time stopped. Their chemistry was undeniable, their smiles too familiar. By the end of that night, it was clear, the spark between them had never died. When news broke that Wagner and Natalie had remarried, the media went into a frenzy. The golden couple was back, and Hollywood wanted to believe in second chances. But behind the fairy tale reunion, cracks quietly began to show again. Natalie confided in her close friend, playwright Mart Crowley, that she and Robert were struggling. They were in marriage counseling, trying to fix what fame, jealousy, and time had broken. Then came a chilling detail. Notes from their Beverly Hills therapist, Dr. Eugene Landy, later leaked to the press. In those private sessions, Natalie reportedly admitted she sometimes feared her husband's sudden bursts of anger. Those words painted a darker picture, one few ever saw behind closed doors. That hidden story might have stayed buried forever, until Stefanie Powers, Wagner's heart-to-heart co-star, brought it up unexpectedly in her recent interview. She remembered that during filming, Wagner had a kind of unpredictable presence, at times warm and tender, but capable of flipping moods in seconds. Stefanie didn't sugarcoat it. She said, "He was incredibly charming, but there was also a darkness in him that only the women who loved him could truly understand." Her statement stunned everyone. Suddenly, the public began viewing Wagner's romantic legacy through a new lens. The man once celebrated as the symbol of timeless Hollywood romance now appeared as something else entirely, a complex soul torn between charm and control, affection and volatility. Vanity Fair once wrote a haunting line that now feels prophetic. Robert Wagner walks among beautiful women as if through mirrors, and in each mirror, he sees a reflection of himself, dazzling yet distorted. That description couldn't have been more fitting. From his passionate affair with Barbara Stanwyck to his tragic entanglement with Natalie Wood, Wagner's story became a tapestry of desire, fear, and mystery. He was a man who could make women fall deeply in love, but also leave them trembling in the shadows of that love. So when tragedy struck off Catalina Island in 1981, all those buried emotions and whispered stories came roaring back. The world was forced to ask the question that still lingers decades later. Was Natalie Wood's death truly an accident, or the devastating finale of a love story built on secrets too heavy to hide? That haunting question, was Natalie Wood's death really an accident, opened the door to yet another storm. A civil lawsuit soon followed. Dragging through the courts for years and ripping open wounds Hollywood had tried desperately to seal. Even after 4 decades, Natalie's death still hangs over the industry like an unhealed scar, a ghost that refuses to fade. On the cold night of November 28, 1981, the dark waters off Catalina Island didn't just swallow a movie star, they birthed one of Hollywood's greatest mysteries. Police quickly called it an accidental drowning due to intoxication, but very few bought that story. Among the doubters was Natalie's younger sister, Lana Wood, a woman who never stopped fighting for the truth. Lana wasn't just a grieving sister. She was part of Natalie's world, her confidant, her protector, and the one who knew the cracks in her marriage to Robert Wagner better than anyone else. Over the years, she appeared on Dateline NBC, Inside Edition, and Good Morning America, demanding answers with one chilling question. Why is everyone silent when the truth still lies at the bottom of the sea? Then, in 2011, Lana teamed up with yacht captain Dennis Davern, the same man who had been aboard Splendor that fateful night. Together, they released a shocking new statement. Davern claimed he heard something heavy fall, followed by a woman's scream, and then silence. He said Robert Wagner was furious, throwing things, shouting, and even stopped anyone from turning on the lights to look for Natalie. That confession hit Hollywood like a thunderclap. The Los Angeles Times splashed it across their front page with the headline, "Lana Wood reopens the Catalina nightmare." The Hollywood Reporter called it the biggest crack in America's perfect husband image. The public went wild. Everyone wanted to know what really happened that night. Lana wasn't done. Fueled by heartbreak and suspicion, she hired a powerful legal team led by attorney Michael Aguirre and filed a civil lawsuit in Los Angeles Superior Court. Her demand was bold and direct. Reopen the entire case and have Natalie's body re-examined. Hollywood couldn't look away. Within days, Vanity Fair, Daily News, and nearly every major outlet in America plastered their covers with chilling photos of the yacht Splendor. The caption beneath them read like an accusation. Was this really the site of an accident or the scene of a hidden truth? The images reignited the obsession, pulling the past straight back into the present. Then came the bombshell announcement. In November 2011, after mounting public pressure, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department officially declared that the Natalie Wood investigation was being reopened. The updated report promised to re-examine every inconsistency, every unexplained bruise, every missing photograph from that night. The newly reopened investigation brought to light details that had been buried for decades, and what surfaced was downright chilling. The updated report revealed fresh evidence. Circular bruises on Natalie's body, consistent with fist marks, not a fall. And the most baffling of all, her life jacket had been put on backward, something almost impossible for a conscious person to do. The implications were terrifying. In 2013, CBS's 48 Hours Mystery aired a gripping special titled Death in Dark Water. The episode showcased newly uncovered forensic photos that showed abrasions around Natalie's wrists. clear signs suggesting that someone might have tried to hold her back. The images were raw and haunting, forcing America to confront the possibility that Natalie Wood hadn't simply slipped into the sea. She might have fought for her life. When The Guardian interviewed Lana Wood shortly after, her voice trembled with emotion. "I'm not seeking revenge," she said. "I just want to know what really happened to my sister. I want that man to answer." The nation went cold, because everyone knew exactly who she meant. By 2018, the Los Angeles Police Department made headlines again when they officially listed Robert Wagner as a person of interest, someone possibly connected to Natalie's death. No charges were filed, but that label alone sent shockwaves through Hollywood. Vanity Fair journalist Maureen Orth captured the public sentiment perfectly when she wrote, "Robert Wagner spent years playing the grieving widower, but the ghost of Catalina has never let him go." And Wagner's reaction? Silence. Complete, deliberate silence. He refused interviews, issued no statements, and let his attorney deliver a single, chillingly cold line. "There is nothing new to say." But that silence didn't calm the storm. It fueled it. In a case already steeped in suspicion, silence began to sound less like protection and more like confession without words. From that point forward, the public dissected every old clip, every photo, every interview Wagner had ever done. His expressions, his posture, even his tone of voice, all re-examined through a darker lens. Many recalled what Stefanie Powers, his heart-to-heart co-star and close friend, had once said about his strange behavior after Natalie's death. In an interview on CBS Sunday Morning, Stefanie revealed, "He would sit silently for hours between takes, his eyes empty. I used to think it was grief. But now, looking back, maybe it was something deeper." Those words echoed across the industry. She later added an eerie detail. During a film shoot in Hawaii, Wagner had confided to her, "Sometimes I can't sleep at night because I still hear the sound of water." That one line, remembered years later, sent shivers down the nation's spine. The Wood family's civil lawsuit wasn't just about justice. It became a war over memory itself. It was the battle between truth and the image Hollywood wanted to keep spotless. Lana didn't win the case, but she won something far greater. She forced the world to look again. She made everyone ask, out loud, what really happened on the waters of Catalina. Those reopened files didn't just stir pain. They cracked open a new, quieter kind of chaos. Beneath the tragedy, investigators began noticing a web of hidden motives, questions of wealth, inheritance, and influence that lingered long after Natalie's death. Who stood to gain from her passing? Who wanted the truth buried? And what secrets had been locked away with her for 40 years? When Natalie Wood's body was finally recovered, a chilling silence swept across Hollywood. The city that thrived on glitz and noise suddenly stood still. On December 3, 1981, her funeral was held at Westwood Memorial Park in Los Angeles, a gathering unlike any other. Hundreds of stars, directors, and producers filled the small cemetery, each face heavy with disbelief. Frank Sinatra, Elizabeth Taylor, Rock Hudson, and Gene Kelly all bowed their heads before a large portrait of the woman once known as the heart of Hollywood. The Los Angeles Times described the service as so silent one could hear the muffled sobs between the relentless flashes of cameras. The air itself felt frozen with grief. But even as the white roses and wreaths began to wilt, quiet questions were already whispering behind the black veils and sunglasses. Who would control Natalie Wood's estate? According to her 1978 will, Natalie's entire fortune, estimated at around $3 million, was to go to her two daughters, Natasha Gregson Wagner and Courtney Wagner. The inheritance included her beloved North Beverly Drive home, her Palm Springs retreat, and royalties from timeless classics like West Side Story and Rebel Without a Cause. Robert Wagner, her husband and now widower, was named sole guardian of both daughters and their assets, a role that came with immense power and trust. At first, things seemed calm. Wagner was often seen attending tributes for Natalie, holding his daughters close for the cameras. The public took comfort in those images. The picture of a broken man trying to be a devoted father. It softened the heartbreak, if only for a while. But barely 6 months later, the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner dropped a bombshell. Wagner had quietly sold Natalie's cherished Palm Springs villa, the very home she once called my safest haven. He also sold much of her jewelry and art collection, claiming it was to cover the cost of raising their daughters. The news hit like a slap across Hollywood's grieving face. The Wood family's reaction was immediate and fierce. Natalie's mother, Maria Zakharenko, and her sister, Lana Wood, were outraged. To them, it wasn't just a financial move, it was emotional betrayal. In an emotional interview with Entertainment Tonight, Lana said bluntly, "No one truly grieving would liquidate a loved one's belongings just months after their passing." That single quote exploded across headlines and struck the public harder than any court document could. People began whispering again, wondering whether Wagner's actions were really about survival or control. Was this the behavior of a man mourning or a man managing an empire built on tragedy? In the years that followed, Wagner tightened his grip over every aspect of Natalie's estate. Friends noticed he became meticulous, almost obsessed with keeping things under wraps. Financial decisions, royalties, even interviews about Natalie, all filtered through him. What was once seen as protective devotion now looked like power being quietly consolidated. By 1984, new cracks began to appear in the picture-perfect image Robert Wagner had worked so hard to protect. Tax documents revealed something startling. His name appeared on nearly every commercial deal tied to Natalie Wood's legacy, from re-release rights of her classic films to marketing campaigns and even the republication of her iconic photographs. Wagner had his hands in it all. Part of the early profits was supposed to go toward the Natalie Wood Art Scholarship Fund, a charitable project meant to honor her memory and help young artists chase their dreams. But shockingly, the fund was dissolved just 2 years after her death, with no official explanation. Reporters asked questions, but Wagner never offered answers. The silence around the missing fund only deepened suspicions. Then came another twist. In 1986, New York Daily News published an investigative piece quoting one of Natalie's close friends, who claimed she once said that if anything ever happened to her, her mother, not Robert, would take care of the children. Though unverified, the report exploded like gasoline on an open flame. The public's unease turned to outright mistrust. Was Wagner just a guardian, or the only one truly benefiting from her death? As always, Wagner kept his silence, letting his lawyer, Fred Luskin, handle the press. Luskin stated firmly, "Everything is transparent under California law." But one sharp Vanity Fair writer cut through the legal jargon with a haunting line that stuck for years. Transparency on paper doesn't always mean transparency in the heart. And then came the photo that shattered the illusion of mourning. Just 2 years after Natalie's death, Wagner was spotted in Beverly Hills, stepping out of a gleaming silver Rolls-Royce, his arm linked with actress Jill St. John, a woman who had once been Natalie's close friend. Hollywood froze. People magazine's September 1983 issue ran the headline, "The famous widower has found new comfort." It sounded gentle, almost sympathetic, but readers saw it as a dagger wrapped in sugar. The nation buzzed for weeks. Was this love reborn or guilt masked as romance? Many thought Wagner had moved on too fast, that his grief looked a little too polished, but not everyone saw it that way. Stefanie Powers, his longtime heart-to-heart co-star, offered a different perspective in her interview with Closer Weekly. She recalled a haunting moment on set. "I once saw him alone in his trailer, just staring into space, as if speaking to someone. I asked if he was okay, and he said quietly, 'I still hear her voice sometimes.'" Stefanie believed that behind the luxury cars and expensive suits, Wagner wasn't at peace. He was terrified. She said, "He carried fear, not comfort. All that money never made him happy." Yet even she admitted that after 1982, something inside him broke for good. He became withdrawn, quiet, and rarely mentioned Natalie unless someone brought her up first. What made things even murkier was the deepening rift between the two families. The Woods believed Wagner was treating Natalie's estate like his personal property, spending freely and controlling every financial decision without oversight. Wagner's side fought back, claiming the Woods were stuck in denial and refusing to accept Natalie's death as an accident. The feud never went to court, but the bitterness lingered for years, poisoning every family interaction. By the late 1980s, Wagner seemed to have finally turned the page, at least publicly. He officially moved in with Jill St. John, and by 1990, the two were married. The tabloids called it a new chapter for Hollywood's most misunderstood widower. But not everyone was buying the redemption story. In the shadows, whispers persisted that Wagner wasn't starting fresh, but rather rewriting his next act on the ashes of someone else's tragedy. The silver Rolls-Royce, the new romance, the silenced scholarship fund, all became symbols of a man who could never quite outrun the storm he helped create. And even as he smiled for the cameras again, the ghost of Natalie Wood lingered just out of frame, a presence that no luxury, no marriage, and no amount of silence could ever erase. By 1984, whispers around Hollywood had turned into pointed questions, and the trail of paper didn't lie. Tax records from that year showed Robert Wagner's name tied to nearly every major commercial deal involving Natalie Wood's image. From film re-release rights to glossy marketing campaigns and even the reprint of her archived photos, Wagner's signature appeared on it all. On paper, part of the profits were supposed to fund the Natalie Wood Art Scholarship Fund, a charity created in her memory to help young artists chase their dreams. But then, mysteriously, it vanished. The fund was quietly dissolved just 2 years after her death, and no one knew why. No explanation, no press statement, nothing. Wagner simply stayed silent. That silence became deafening. Then, in 1986, the New York Daily News reignited the flames with a headline that stopped readers cold. The story quoted a close friend of Natalie's who claimed, "She once said that if anything ever happened to her, her mother would look after the children, not Robert." The quote couldn't be verified, but that didn't matter. It poured gasoline on a fire that had never really gone out. People began to wonder, was Wagner simply a guardian or the one who stood to gain the most from her death? As usual, Wagner refused to speak directly, leaving his lawyer, Fred Luskin, to face the press. Luskin issued a calm, rehearsed statement. Everything is transparent under California law. But one sharp line from Vanity Fair cut through the legal smoke like a knife. Transparency on paper doesn't always mean transparency in the heart. That sentence would follow Wagner for years. And then came the moment that made even his supporters flinch. Just 2 years after Natalie's death, Wagner was spotted cruising through Beverly Hills in a brand new silver Rolls-Royce, smiling for photographers. On his arm, actress Jill St. John, who had once been one of Natalie's closest friends. The sight stunned Hollywood. People magazine's September 1983 issue featured a now infamous headline, "The famous widower has found new comfort." The words were polite, but the tone said everything. The nation buzzed. To many, the glamorous photo op felt like proof that Wagner had moved on far too easily. Could grief really fade that fast? But Stefanie Powers, his longtime heart-to-heart co-star, saw things differently. In an interview with Closer Weekly, she shared a memory that painted a more complicated picture. "I once saw him sitting alone in his trailer, staring into space like he was talking to someone. I asked who he was speaking to, and he said quietly, 'I still hear her voice sometimes.'" Her words revealed something darker than peace. Wagner was haunted. "He carried fear, not comfort," Stefanie said. "All that wealth never brought him happiness." She later admitted that after 1982, something inside him shifted completely. He became withdrawn, distant, and almost never mentioned Natalie unless someone else brought her up first. But even as he faded from the spotlight, the storm behind the scenes grew worse. The Wood family believed Wagner was treating Natalie's estate as his own, selling assets, making deals, and keeping them out of the loop. Wagner's side hit back, claiming the Woods couldn't accept Natalie's death and were clinging to conspiracy. While Robert Wagner's camp insisted that the Wood family refused to accept reality, their quiet feud never reached the courtroom, but its shadow lingered for decades. By the late 1980s, Wagner had officially moved in with actress Jill St. John, and by 1990, they were married. To the press, it looked like a fresh start, the long-awaited redemption of Hollywood's widower. But to many who remembered Natalie, it felt unsettling. Whispers spread that Wagner wasn't beginning a new chapter, he was rewriting one that had ended in tragedy. The question of Natalie Wood's estate was never legally settled. It simply dissolved into silence, leaving a deep scar between the two families. The Woods remained convinced that justice had never been served, while Wagner's side insisted it was too late, too painful to reopen the past. And through all the contracts, sold properties, and vanished funds, one thing still held more weight than money: the truth, the one thing no one could seem to find. That's why, when Robert Wagner released his memoir, Pieces of My Heart, in 2008, the world held its breath. After nearly 30 years of silence, The man at the center of Hollywood's most enduring mystery was finally speaking, on his own terms. Cameras flashed again as Wagner stepped back into the public eye, older, poised, and calm, his trademark smile shadowed by the sadness in his eyes. He didn't return through film or television, but through something even riskier, the written word. His memoir, published by HarperCollins, was introduced as a letter of apology to the past and to the people I loved. But readers saw something very different. To the public, Pieces of My Heart wasn't just a book, it was a courtroom in print, with Wagner playing both the defendant and his own defense attorney. Across more than 400 pages, he painted a sweeping picture of Hollywood's golden age, the 1950s and 60s, when the studios molded stars like clay and every smile came with a contract. Wagner wrote about his rise under 20th Century Fox, his friendships with icons, his romances, and the loneliness hiding behind the spotlight. The first half read like nostalgia. But then came the middle chapters, the ones everyone turned to first, the chapters about Natalie Wood, 70 pages of love, loss, and regret. Wagner called Natalie the flame that never went out. He described her as the great love of his life and her death as a tragic accident with no one to blame. He insisted there had been no argument that night, no jealousy, no violence, just a fateful night at sea. His version of events sounded calm, almost poetic, but that calm only made the public furious. Because the story he told didn't match what others had witnessed. The contradictions were too big to ignore. Every paragraph about that night on Splendor clashed with decades of police files and interviews. Even Captain Dennis Davern, the only surviving witness from the yacht, had long claimed something very different. He told NBC that Wagner lost his temper, threw things, and delayed the search. Yet in the book, Wagner painted Davern as a loyal man who did his best. Readers noticed the careful phrasing, the selective memory. It felt like Wagner was rewriting the night piece by piece, smoothing every rough edge into something palatable. To some, it was a love letter. To others, a cover-up bound in hardcover. What stung most was the tone, how Wagner seemed to dance around the one thing everyone wanted, a clear answer. Instead, his memoir left readers with an unsettling fog of half-truths and polished pain. He wrote as though love could erase evidence, as though nostalgia could rewrite history. Vanity Fair summed it up best. Wagner's book feels less like a confession and more like an attempt to control the narrative before it controls him. And they weren't wrong. The more Wagner tried to explain, the more the contradictions stood out. The contradictions inside Pieces of My Heart were impossible to ignore, and critics tore into them with precision. Vanity Fair's Maureen Orth didn't hold back, writing, "Wagner tells the story as though he were the only victim of that tragedy." Even the Los Angeles Times ran a brutal headline that read, "Pieces of My Heart or Pieces of Her Story." The title said it all. Many believed Wagner wasn't just remembering history, he was rewriting it in his favor. But the controversy didn't stop with Natalie Wood. Wagner also used his memoir to revisit the parade of romances that had defined his Hollywood life. He wrote of Barbara Stanwyck, the screen legend, 23 years older than him, with glowing affection. "She taught me how to live and love in a world that isn't kind." He described being captivated by Marilyn Monroe's gaze at a wild party inside the Chateau Marmont, and confessed to a brief romance with Joan Collins, a fling that once inspired the tabloids to nickname him Wagner's Web of Women. But what infuriated readers wasn't who he loved, it was how he wrote about them. Wagner's words turned every woman into a symbol rather than a person. Natalie, he claimed, was too sensitive. Barbara, he said, was so lonely she couldn't refuse affection. And Joan? He described her as fiery but lacking depth. The tone was calm, reflective, and infuriatingly self-centered. In the story of his life, every woman who once defined him became just a supporting character, while he alone remained the misunderstood lead. Despite the backlash, Pieces of My Heart rocketed to success, instantly landing on the New York Times top 10 bestseller list. Hollywood couldn't look away. Wagner was suddenly everywhere. Larry King Live, The Today Show, even Oprah. Each time he revisited that night at sea, lowering his voice and bowing his head with perfect timing. "I'll never forget the last image of her," he'd whisper. The audience would fall silent, spellbound. But to many watching, it didn't look like raw grief. It looked like a performance, a script rehearsed to perfection. The harshest response came from Lana Wood, Natalie's younger sister, who had carried her pain for decades. During an Access Hollywood interview, her fury cut through every polished line of Wagner's memoir. "He wrote it to hide his guilt, not to tell the truth," she said. "That book is a way to erase my sister's memory." Her accusations struck deep, echoing across newsrooms and talk shows alike. Lana believed Wagner had chosen the perfect moment to publish, when most witnesses were elderly or gone, and no one could challenge his version of events. To her, it wasn't just storytelling, it was manipulation. Then, 6 years later, Wagner returned with another bombshell. In 2014, he published his second memoir, You Must Remember This. If Pieces of My Heart was his plea for redemption, this one felt like a stroll through golden age nostalgia. Page after page glittered with memories of Hollywood royalty, cocktail parties with Cary Grant, long filming days beside Bette Davis, elegant dances shared with Elizabeth Taylor and Sophia Loren. It was charming on the surface, almost wistful, but once again, Wagner couldn't resist stirring the pot. He dropped hints of past flings, including a supposed romance with Audrey Hepburn, calling her the woman who made me want to be a better man. No one could verify the story, but that didn't matter. It was enough to land Wagner right back in the headlines. Critics rolled their eyes, accusing him of romanticizing his past while skating around the truth. The Hollywood Reporter's Janice Min summed it up perfectly. Robert Wagner understands the media game. He doesn't need to prove the truth, he just needs to tell it well enough that people forget to ask. That single line captured exactly how Wagner had survived for so long in an industry built on illusion. He knew how to craft an image, to polish pain into poetry and scandal into charm. But perhaps the most intriguing and controversial part of the book came tucked near the end in a short yet loaded chapter about Stefanie Powers, his longtime heart-to-heart co-star and confidant. Readers expected a sweet tribute, maybe a few behind-the-scenes anecdotes. What they got instead was something far more personal, a reflection that blurred the lines between friendship, affection, and something unspoken. Wagner hinted that his bond with Stefanie had been deeper than most understood, describing her as the person who reminded me I could still feel alive. The vague, intimate phrasing reignited speculation all over again, fans wondered. Was this a confession wrapped in sentiment, or just another perfectly timed story crafted to keep his name alive in the spotlight? Whatever the truth, Wagner's second memoir proved one thing beyond doubt. He hadn't just mastered Hollywood's art of storytelling. He had turned his life, his loves, and even his losses into a narrative that kept the world watching, still wondering where the truth ended and the performance began. Wagner once called her the most beautiful soul I've ever met, but no one could have imagined that Stefanie Powers, the woman who had stood by him for decades and was once considered his closest confidant, would eventually break her silence and reveal an entirely different side of the Hollywood gentleman. In a 2024 interview with the Daily Mail, Stefanie dropped a revelation that shook Hollywood to its core. She said Robert had two selves. One was the witty, charming man everyone adored, the Robert who made the world believe in old-school romance. But the other? A lonely soul, always hiding something. She remembered how, during filming, he'd often sit silently for hours, staring into nothing, before suddenly bursting into laughter, as if trying to cover up something heavy deep inside. He never spoke directly about Natalie, Stefanie said quietly, but whenever someone mentioned her name, he'd look down, as if he was seeing something only he could see. Her words painted a haunting image, one that seemed to pierce through the polished armor Wagner had worn for so long. She also revealed that when Pieces of My Heart was released, Wagner had mailed her a signed copy. Inside was a handwritten note that read, "This is my truth." But Stefanie admitted she never fully believed it. "He writes beautifully," she told the reporter, "but I can feel there are chapters missing, the ones he didn't want anyone to read." That simple statement reignited a storm that had never really died down. Because this time, it wasn't a journalist or a critic speaking, it was someone who knew him, someone who had understood him, defended him, and shared his spotlight for years. And if even she now doubted his truth, what did that say about the story he'd been telling the world all along? By the end of You Must Remember This, Wagner still gave no new answers. Every line of his writing felt like a soft curtain, beautiful, elegant, but hiding something behind it. Instead of closure, he left readers with more questions. Why did every version of his story change just slightly over time? What was he protecting, and from whom? Afterward, Wagner quietly stepped away from the Hollywood stage for good. He settled in Aspen, Colorado, with Jill St. John, far from the flashing lights and endless interviews. But peace is a fragile thing when memories don't rest. Even now, in his 90s, whenever Robert Wagner's name resurfaces, two things come rushing back to the public's mind: the tragic love story on Catalina Island and the two books that never gave the full truth. And now, as Stefanie Powers, at 82 years old, finally speaks her truth, Hollywood is holding its breath once again, because she isn't just another co-star or an echo from the past. She's the woman who stood beside Wagner when the camera stopped rolling. The one who saw beyond the tailored suits and that practiced smile. Maybe, just maybe, her story is the missing piece, the final clue in a mystery that's haunted the film world for more than 40 years. So what do you think? Was Stefanie Powers revealing the truth the world has waited decades to hear, or just offering her own memories through the fog of time? Could her words finally shed light on the secrets hidden beneath Hollywood's glittering surface? Or are they just another layer in a legend too complicated to ever untangle? If this story gripped you as much as it has shaken Hollywood, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more hidden stories from behind the silver screen. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss a single twist in the tales that shaped Hollywood's brightest stars and its darkest mysteries. Share your thoughts below. Do you believe Stefanie's revelation is the truth finally surfacing? Or is it just the echo of secrets that were never meant to be told? Let's talk about it in the comments, and who knows? Maybe you'll notice something Hollywood has been trying to hide for over 4 decades. See you in the next video.